Hello. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Ted Breaux. I'm a research scientist, absinthe distiller, absinthe historian, creator of spirits, amateur ethnobotanist, all kinds of things. Creator of Jade Liqueurs, creator of Lucid Absinthe, sold in the US. Um, yeah, so I've been involved with absinthe a very long time, since 1994. So I'm happy to be here.
Claude-Alain Bugnon, master distiller of Absinthe in Couvet, the village where Absinthe was born, co-owner of the Distillery Artemisia Bugnon and La Clandestine Absinthe Supérieure brand.
Hello, everybody. My name is Stefano Rossoni. I'm a professional absinthe distiller. And as far as I know, I was the first to commercially produce authentic absinthe in Italy back in 2007.
Shall we pour a glass of absinthe?
Well, I got started a little early. This is my glass of absinthe. it looks like terracotta. This is actually a cocktail called the Bitter Party of One, created by Max Barwick, a bartender in North Carolina here in the USA. It is a competition winner. This is one of my favorite cocktails. It's amazing. It's like an incredible daiquiri. I'm happy to share the recipe with you if you'd like to have it.
We can pour a glass of absinthe, of course. My favorite one, La Clandestine Absinthe, 3 cl, added with 3.5 times more fresh water. Beautiful rouge, milky, slightly blue, and when you drink absinthe, it's not stronger as wine, 11%. Cheers.
With pleasure, I went ahead and I prepared a glass of La Montagneuse, which is my latest absinthe. And it's starting now to hit its prime in terms of aging. And frankly, I can't keep my hands off of it. So I'm very happy to join you with a glass of absinthe.
What are the features of a great absinthe?
The features of a great absinthe. So there are many absinthes, and not that many of them are what I consider to be good, and very, very few of those are what I consider to be great. The way my mind works is I see flavors like the way I see tones, sounds coming from musical instruments. So, what makes a good absinthe is having flavors that work. It's like playing a chord on a piano, and all the notes are correct, and it makes a nice sound. That's good. That's a good absinthe. Um, what makes a great absinthe is when I get more than sounds. It's the way the sounds work together. It's music. So the flavors are like music. They harmonize so well together that you almost cannot uh, uh, taste the individual components. So it's difficult to explain, but that's what I taste when I taste absinthe. That's what I look for. Absinthe to me that tastes like music. So I hope I explained that in a way that it makes sense.
There are several characteristics to define a great absinthe. The first is its taste quality, which must be very balanced. Of course, there is a taste of anise, but then all of the other aroma of the different plants used, which must mix without dominating one over the other. To finish, there is a persistence of the bitterness of the absinthe. There is also the louche side, which must be intense, and also the olfactory side, which must not have strange odors.
It's not too difficult to make a drinkable absinthe, but it's very difficult to make a great absinthe. You need a combination of things to make a great absinthe. First of all, you need top-notch, super high quality ingredients. And I'm talking about especially the botanicals, but also the alcohol base. You can make a great absinthe if you don't have very high quality ingredients. It's like cooking. You're not going to be able to make some kind of really, a high level dish, that you could find, that you could eat at a fancy restaurant with, really cheap ingredients. So that is first and foremost, you need very, very high quality botanicals. Second, it needs to be distilled well. So you need to have talented and skilled distiller who knows how to make absinthe, who knows all the idiosyncrasies of absinthe distillation, and who is able to distill a batch of absinthe with no flaws. And third, you need balance. A great absinthe is very balanced. It's very easy to make an absinthe where you have one ingredient, maybe a very good ingredient, maybe it's a fantastic flavor note, but it just dominates the absinthe. And, it might be pleasant. It might be, some people might think it's very good, but I would not consider that great. A great absinthe has balance. So when you have a strong flavor note, you need something else to balance that so that it doesn't just stand out and kind of completely cover everything else. So high quality ingredients, skilled distiller, and a balanced recipe. That's what, in my opinion, makes for a great absinthe.
What do you like most about making absinthe?
Well, I've been distilling absinthe. I've been distilling absinthe for about 20 years now. Since January 2004 is when I started distilling absinthe commercially. It's when I created Jade Absinthe, when I started distilling Jade. To me, absinthe, everything that I do is all done by hand with equipment from the 19th century, and everything is done by hand, and it's never the same exact thing twice. There's so many decisions that have to be made, and timing's important, and it's all on me. I'm the only one that does it. So for me, it's like having a movie that you really, really like, and from time to time you watch this movie. You never get tired of watching it. But every time you watch it, imagine if every time you watch it, the ending was slightly different. So that's what it's like for me when I make absinthe. And I hope I explain that in a way that makes sense.
What I prefer is the adjustment of our recipe and the very precise distillation in order to guarantee as much stability as possible. Sometimes I can spend more than 15 minutes adjusting the heating of my distiller.
Absinthe for me is a creative outlet. So what I love about making absinthe is creating recipes. I love finding new and interesting ways to combine ingredients in a recipe so that when you drink the absinthe, it provides an experience. That is what I love the most about making absinthe. So creating recipes.
What's the first absinthe you ever created?
Well, the first absinthe I ever created was in early 1994, and I created that in a laboratory. At the time, I was trying to study absinthe. There was no absinthe. There was very little information about it, so I didn't have much information to guide me. But looking back, what I distilled, was it good? No, not really. But it was very complex and intense, and it was interesting. So it did keep my interest. Eventually, I would get better at it, fortunately. But yeah, so that was the first time that I distilled it. So it was a long time ago. Yeah, good memories.
My first absinthe was La Clandestine, which is based on 1935 recipe that was produced by Charlotte Vaucher. Then, based on this recipe, I created Angélique Fée Verte, which is now Clandestine Verte.
The first absinthe I ever created was L'Italien back in 2007. That's if we're talking about a final kind of complete recipe ready for commercial production. I did make some earlier recipes in the previous years, but they were not ready. They were not mature. So what I consider my first recipe is l'Italien.
How do you select ingredients for your absinthe recipes?
The way I select ingredients for my absinthe is maybe a little different than many people because what I do, everything I do is about historical accuracy. So I select botanicals that I source from the original regions where those botanicals were grown in the pre-ban times. And that the world has changed, economics has changed. It's difficult to do. I work with different people. That's always a challenge. Um, it seems that everything I do is a challenge, but if you want historical accuracy, there will be challenges, and that's just how it works. The base spirits that I use, I mean, it's everything that it seems that I do. I do to be as historically accurate as I can, and there's always challenges involved with that. So, and maybe if that wasn't so important, then I could do it differently. But that's the way that I do things, and that's part of what makes Jade Jade.
To start, we take the plant that our local farmers produce. There is a large and small wormwood, hyssop, lemon balm and peppermint. For the anise and fennel that we have to import, we always do quality tests before placing an order.
Very good question. Let me take a sip first. So absinthe is different compared to any other distillate, any other spirits, any other niche products even, because even compared to other commercial niche products, absinthe is produced in a much smaller amount. So this creates a variety of issues. And I'm not just talking about not being able to make use of economies of scale to be able to purchase ingredients at a lower price, which is still very much an issue, but that's not even the worst part. The worst part for me is that buying small amounts of ingredients and having to distill batches of absinthe fairly infrequently comes with a series of problems in terms of consistency. So I mentioned previously that I believe that one of the most important elements that make a great absinthe is very high quality ingredients. And the issue here is that even if you find an ingredient that is very good and very high quality from a certain supplier, and you buy, you test it, it's great. If you wait 6 months or a year, and then you go to the same supplier and you buy the same ingredient, it might be completely different. And sometimes it's just that, that the weather this year, was different than the previous one. Other times not all the suppliers grow all the ingredients that they sell. In fact, more often than not, they don't. And it might be that they just bought the same ingredient from a different farmer or from, a different grower, and it's just going to be very different. So what I do is when I'm creating a recipe, I source samples of ingredients from the suppliers I work with, and these are suppliers that prove to be able to provide high quality ingredients, high quality botanicals in the past. I test them and I choose the best one. I produce the batch of absinthe, but then before I produce the same batch of absinthe again, I test the ingredient again. So every time I make a new batch of absinthe, even if it's the same recipe, I still buy a smaller amount of all the botanicals and I test them in a very small run to ensure that they are the same as the previous time I bought them. and that, the quality is the same, the flavor intensity is the same, so that the result is going to be somewhat consistent. Obviously, we know absinthe is an artisanal product, so there will be some small differences between batches, right? So it's like wines. You have a certain vintage of wine will be different compared to a different vintage, but we're talking about differences in the nuances, in the balance of the flavors, in the bouquet of aromas, but it's still recognizable as that specific wine, right? So the same thing, I believe, should apply to absinthe. There might be some differences. They're not all going to be identical, but they should be recognizable. First of all, they should maintain the same quality level. That's crucial. And additionally, they should be recognizable as that specific recipe, as that specific brand of absinthe. And I've seen firsthand buying a specific ingredient, like green anise, for example, from a certain supplier, and then coming back after a year or so to buy that green anise from that supplier, and the what I got was different. It was different in flavor. It was different in in the luge that it would yield. So when that happens, I have to either change that ingredient, change that supplier, or adjust the dosages so that I can maintain a consistent quality level and a consistent identity and profile of my recipes. So this is how I choose ingredients for my recipes.
Have you ever tried distilling something unusual or weird? And if yes, how did it come out?
I've been distilling botanicals for a very long time now, and I have distilled many things that are unusual and weird. Not all of them worked out well. Some of them did. Some of them I thought maybe would have commercial potential, but in all cases, it was a learning experience and it was very educational. So, in one of the things I study is 19th century pharmacy. So there is distillation involved in that. It's been a very big journey for me. But all of these things that I do and have done, and the unusual and strange things I have distilled, have definitely helped my understanding of botanicals and absinthe. So it's been a great journey.
So far, not done anything strange.
Yes, I did. I did distill many unusual and weird things in my career as an absinthe distiller. How did they come out? It depends. Sometimes they come out really good, and sometimes they didn't. I think it's important to experiment when making absinthe. I think it's important to sometimes think outside the box and just try new things. And you just never know. Sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it won't. Some unusual things actually ended up working really well and ended up, being used in the final recipe for some of my absinthes, and other stuff just didn't. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but I think experimentation is always good.
In your opinion, how far can you go with absinthe innovation while still respecting tradition?
When I'm presented with absinthe, I expect it to look, smell, and taste like absinthe. Okay, that is, and also that it should be distilled correctly. That is the minimum. That's what I expect. If I taste something and I don't recognize it as absinthe, in my opinion, that is not respecting tradition. So, in the category of absinthe, there is a lot of space for creativity within limits. So, just like gin, I feel it's you can distill a very nice, interesting gin that is not traditional, and I'm glad many people do, because it has made the gin category more interesting than the gin category would be if it were just all the same type of London style gins. So there is room for variation. Same thing with absinthe. There is room for creativity. There's room for variation within limits. So I think that's, as long as it looks, smells, and tastes like, and I recognize it as absinthe, then I think that's okay, and that's respecting tradition.
I'm a purist, and it's so hard to get people to understand what real absinthe is that I don't think it's right to look for new things.
This is not an easy question to answer. It's easier to do it than to answer and explain it. The thing with absinthe is that, as for many other aspects, it's very unique among other products. So absinthe really lacks widespread identity, and with that, I mean, not everybody knows what absinthe is supposed to taste like. If you talk about wines or champagne or beer or rum, everybody knows what they're supposed to taste like. But with absinthe, a lot of people don't know, and that is a problem. So with absinthe, we have to be extra careful about not doing anything that jeopardizes the identity of absinthe as a product. So I see, in the past years, there were issues with fake absinthes, made with no anise and no wormwood and no lush and whatever, and macerated instead of distilled. And the problem with that is that a lot of people just didn't know that those were not absinthes. So, the producers could get away with it. And this is something that with other products, you can't get away with it. So, if you are a champagne producer and you decide one day, like, oh, I'm going to make a champagne with malted barley, nobody's going to drink it and think, oh, yeah, this is champagne. No, people are going to drink it and say, like, oh, well, this is actually a beer. With absinthe, on the other hand, not so much. So we're seeing even recently that there are producers who are coming out with absinthes that don't lush, for example. And unfortunately, that is not absinthe. We need to be very strict about what absinthe is. So it needs to contain wormwood, anise, and fennel. It needs to be distilled. It needs to not have sugar. It needs to be colored, with a natural infusion of botanicals. And it needs to lush. This is what makes absinthe absinthe. Once you are respecting that, then you can go crazy and you can do whatever you want. Now, I would argue you still want to have something that is recognizable as absinthe, right? So if you make a recipe that only tastes like, I don't know, like juniper or orange peel or something else, and that's just completely covering everything else, and someone drinks it and it's like, oh, weird, like this doesn't actually taste like absinthe. Yeah, that's not great. I wouldn't advise that. But as long as you are respecting the tradition of what makes absinthe absinthe, what is recognizable and identifiable as absinthe, then you can really, sky's the limit. You can experiment with pretty much anything. I mean, absinthe can be extremely flexible, extremely versatile as a product, and there is no end to the interesting ingredients and flavors that you can put in an absinthe. So it's, you both have to be very strict and very careful, and at the same time, you have a massive amount of freedom once you accomplish that to just be creative and experiment with things.
Which absinthe do you consider to be your masterpiece?
If there's one absinthe that I consider to be my masterpiece, it would be Jade Nouvelle Orleans, because only Jade Nouvelle Orleans is 100% me. Jade Nouvelle Orleans is what I would have distilled if I were an absinthe distiller in the pre-ban times and I wanted to compete in the absinthe category. That's what I would have done. The other Jades are all me recreating what other people did, what other distillers did. So while those are interesting and wonderful and historically important, only Jade Nouvelle Orleans is 100% me, so that would have to be my masterpiece.
For me, it's la clandestine blanche, Absinthe supérieure.
If I were to say which absinthe I consider my masterpiece, it would be L'Ancienne. When I started working on L'Ancienne, I decided that I was going to try to recreate the flavor of pre-ban absinthe the way it is now with more than 100 years of aging. And that turned out to be the biggest challenge of my absinthe career. I had to work really hard to find the right ingredients, and I also invented a proprietary absinthe distilling technique that I only use with L'Ancienne. So it was very, very challenging, but it also ended up being probably the most rewarding experience of my absinthe career.
What is the one thing you would like to tell to a new absinthe distiller?
If there's one thing I would want to say to a new absinthe distiller is distilling absinthe is like learning to play a musical instrument, like the guitar. The concept is not that difficult. It's not that difficult to learn some basic things on it, but it is difficult to master it. That takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of comprehension and understanding. And that's what it takes to master. Distilling absinthe is the same way. No different. So, good luck.
Don't run too far behind the market for new products, because when it's no longer fashionable, you will disappear.
If there was one thing that I would like to tell a new absinthe distiller is be patient. Take your time, experiment, study, get feedback from the absinthe community. I found that the absinthe community is wonderful in terms of providing feedback to new distillers. So take your time to perfect a recipe before you bring it to the market, because the absinthe market is pretty saturated with absinthe, and chances are you're not going to make a lot of money with absinthe. So if you're making absinthe, do it because you're passionate about it. And if you're doing it because you're passionate about it, make sure that you bring to the market a really great absinthe.
What do you think should be done to make absinthe more popular?
Well, one of the things that is helping to make absinthe more popular right now is the change in tastes and fashion to stronger flavors. When I began distilling Jade in 1994, early 1994, well, vodka and flavored vodka were in fashion. Those are not strong flavors. Absinthe is a very strong flavored spirit. Right now, fortunately, we have seen a change. Here in the United States, we've seen a tremendous interest in tequila and mezcal, which are very strong flavors. We've also, in the US, have seen a great interest in aperitivi and amari. So strong flavors, again, this is becoming quite popular. So it is helping to boost the interest in absinthe, because absinthe is a strongly flavored spirit. So that's one of the trends that we need to ride and take advantage of, especially here in the United States, where there's so much education that needs to be done. And as long as people are in a position to embrace strong flavors, it helps to make absinthe more popular.
In my opinion, the most important work is educating consumers about real absinthe with good consumption practices. It's always amazing to see people discover that absinthe can be drunk with water without having more alcohol than wine in a glass.
I think absinthe could become more popular But when I say more popular, I still mean as a niche product. And I think to become more popular as a niche product, we should try to open up more to new and different people. And I'm talking about chefs in restaurants. I'm talking about sommeliers. I'm talking about uh, the luxury market. There are a lot of people and consumers that traditionally have not really been interested in absinthe, and I think absinthe could really benefit from uh, reaching these people.
What's your experience with absinthe today, and how do you see its future?
My experience with absinthe today is that absinthe is it is an important part of classic cocktail history and culture, and it's something that uh, one cannot master absinthe or classic cocktail history without understanding absinthe and absinthe's place in that history, in that culture. And as long as this renaissance, the global renaissance of classic cocktails continues, then absinthe plays a role, um, and that's where I see it absinthe really being appreciated. And I see this as a good um, a way to interest people in the story of absinthe, which is fascinating. It's the most fascinating spirit in history. Um, so I think that those are the avenues to uh, to get people to understand absinthe and get people to appreciate it. And that's where I see absinthe taking the place is classic cocktail culture.
My experience after 20 years of production is that I think there is still a long way for absinthe to regain a real place in the market.
I think absinthe today is very much in a transitional phase. If we think about absinthe at the beginning of its renaissance, there were a lot of fake poor quality absinthes and there were very, very few authentic absinthes. And then things changed and there were far more authentic absinthes and far fewer fake poor quality absinthes. And now we have a lot of authentic absinthes, but the market has not grown. It's still very, very, very small. So it's a very weird situation. Um, there are a lot of authentic absinthes. There are not that many people buying absinthes. Um, at the same time, there are newer people getting into absinthe, and there's kind of a new wave of absinthe drinkers. So it's very interesting what is happening with absinthe. And as far as what the future is going to be, I can say with the utmost certainty that I have no idea. I really don't know, but I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to happen.
Would you like to send a message to the Italian community?
If there's one message I should say to the Italian community, it would be grazie mille per il vostro interesse e supporto. So thank you very much for your help and support. Uh, the Italian cocktail community in general is one that is fantastic, and one that I feel like I have a strong cultural connection. Me coming from South Louisiana, which is a place uniquely cultural and with strong ties to Europe, and also a culture that appreciates strong flavors and understands them, which is my experience with the Italian community and Italian bartenders. So that's something I think is very important to cocktail culture, and I'm glad that the Italian community seems to understand absinthe very well and appreciate its flavors of anise and fennel and understand them. It's been a big help to the absinthe community worldwide, and we all of the absinthe distillers we all really appreciate it. So thank you. Okay, ciao.
To our Italian friends, discover absinthe with very cold water as an aperitif and share your experience with your friends so that they can also discover absinthe. Enjoy it. Cheers.
Per questa risposta passo all'italiano, le altre domande le ho risposte in inglese, visto che comunque questa intervista è stata fatta anche con distillatori stranieri, quindi abbiamo deciso di fare tutto in inglese, ma ovviamente per il messaggio alla comunità italiana lo farò in italiano. E la prima cosa che voglio dire è grazie. La comunità assenziofila italiana è sempre stata un'enorme fonte di supporto per me, e soprattutto durante gli anni ho ricevuto tante email di apprezzamento dei miei prodotti e di supporto per il lavoro che stavo facendo, e questo supporto è stato estremamente importante, soprattutto nei momenti più difficili, perché comunque la carriera di distillatore di Assenzio non è facilissima, quindi sono molto grato per il supporto che ho sempre avuto dalla comunità assenziofila italiana. E un messaggio in particolare che posso dire è che nonostante alcuni sanno io adesso vivo all'estero, le mie radici sono state e sempre saranno in Italia, e lo vedete anche con il lavoro che ho fatto con la mia trilogia di essenzi, che è appunto ispirata ai vari paesaggi italiani, e comunque in generale, a prescindere da dove va, dove sia, il mio cuore resterà sempre in Italia. Quindi grazie a tutti e salute.